Hello, hi, welcome to another Walter Scott Prize for Historical Fiction video. This is my 7th video trying to read the whole long list from the Walter Scott Prize. I'm a little bit behind where I would like to have been. I'm a bit slower than last year, but I am in the middle of a master's degree, so I have a lot more reading to be doing, but I am still trying to fit the whole prize in. I'm going to read the whole shortlist first. So this next book is on the shortlist. It'll be my 4th from the shortlist. So I've only got one more to do from the shortlist, but I do want to read the whole long list as well. But I may end up going past June when the winner is announced, but I will still finish the long list at some point. Anyway, this video is all about Once the Deed is Done by Rachel Seiffert. So what is this about? So this is another book set in the Second World War period, similar to the Matchbox Girl. Here we have different perspectives in a small town in North Germany. And when I say different perspectives, we have perspectives from people who live in the town. They differ in themselves. We have some people in the town who, maybe were for the war effort, who can't understand how they've lost the war and are quite bitter towards these new English occupations that are happening, especially the one that's happening in their town. You've got other people who live in the town who never really got on with the war effort. So there's the schoolmaster Arnold, or Arno, and he stopped himself from putting the portrait of Hitler up in the school, which they had to do. He held it off for as long as he could, and that was raising suspicions, raising questions about him. He eventually got took off away to fight for the war effort. And then we also have the point of view of Ruth, who is an English Red Cross worker who is sent to the munition works in this town. So we follow, I would say Ruth's quite a prominent character. So they discover when the English are coming over once the war's been won, they find this munition works and there's loads of these prisoners who are in forced labour, mostly Polish and Ukrainian. And Ruth's job is to sort of, I say rehouse them. So basically they're in squalor inside this munition works. They set up tents outside the works. It's still not a great living situation, but it's a lot better than what they had. Also, they're getting rations, better rations, they're being fed, looked after. And Ruth's effort is basically trying to document all of these workers and trying to find, their loved ones. And also the end result is trying to get them back home to where they came from so they can go home. And I'd say in whole, this is like a homage to those people that were displaced during the war and also who lost their families. And the story is quite interesting because we get that from different perspectives. We get the Germans who were living in this small town who, were displaced from their families, whose sons, whose fathers were sent to the war effort, who now become prisoners of war. And we have the prisoners of war, the Polish and the Ukrainians, who are now free men, but they are also displaced from their family. They don't know where their brothers, their children, and Ruth's job is trying to document them to see if she can reconnect these people back together. And I'll say the prominent story there as well is between the two children that Ruth comes across, Eva and Sasha, who were torn away from their mother. The mother was taken to work, forced work somewhere, whereas Eva and Sasha were taken to a small farm and actually were looked after quite well by the German farmer they went to live with. And so, we follow a year in the life, basically, from just about when the war ends to 1946. And we're following these different perspectives. And it's a really interesting contrast between, I say, these stories of people who have lost their loved ones because of the war effort. But we have, I say, the people who are already living in this German town, whose sons and fathers have been sent to fight, who are now prisoners of war, to the prisoners who are now free, but are still, don't know or don't understand what their new place in society is. Now the Soviets have taken over Eastern Europe. Is there any better to what they were experiencing before? I think for me, at the heart of this story, it's a reminder that we're all human beings at the end of the day, no matter what side we might have been on. And stories like this, what I liked about this is it's wonderfully unique in the story. there's so many different stories about the Second World War, but this one I say is quite unique to me anyway, where we're getting these different perspectives from people living in this North German town. And it's, yeah, as I said, it's interesting to see some of these locals who are quite bitter to their new English occupation taking place in their town. Others are quite grateful for it. And yeah, it's a really interesting narrative, and that's what draws me to the story. There's some great writing as well, very accessible. As I mentioned, it just seems like an homage to those families that lost people, and even at the end there's a little note explaining how many hundreds of thousands of people were displaced, who were disconnected from their families. And yeah, it's really somber and hard-hitting, especially towards the end. And that is going to bring me to my little niggling point. So it doesn't take away from this being 5 stars for me, and you probably noticed I've given pretty much everything in the Walter Scott Prize 5 stars, and that's because when I'm reading along with the Walter Scott Prize, I like to put my judging hat on and be a little bit more objective than I would be when I'm doing a normal book review, where I'm more sort of subjective, because I like to put my judging hat on, and even if it's not my cup of tea, I would, appreciate the writing or the story, the uniqueness to the narrative that we've got. And that's what I'm trying to do here. And yeah, for the most part, Once the Deed is Done is a really great, unique story, very accessible. My niggling point. So on the blurb, we get this insight to a character called Benno, who is the first character we're introduced to. And it's giving this impression that Benno witnesses something that he doesn't quite understand, and it's quite heavy on him and how it affects him. But apart from right at the beginning, and even then it's quite vague, we don't really hear much about this until like nearer the end. We see briefly how it affects him, and then right at the end, pow, gut punch, we see what the events were. I think for me, and this is purely subjective, my own personal taste, maybe if that was removed from the blurb and it was a bit more general about, these townsfolk in North Germany dealing with the occupation and these new free Polish Ukrainian workers, that sort of thing. And then we was alluded to during the story about Benno and what he did experience, little bits here and there. I think then when the end came, it would have been more of a gut punch, like, wow, emotional response for me. But because the blurb kind of gives something away, you're already looking for what's happening, and it's not alluded to that much. But when it happens, I'm kind of almost expecting something like that to happen. So yeah, I just think for me, personal taste would have been, don't give me any inkling that that's going to happen, just allude to it here and there throughout the story, and then when the end came, I'd have been like, wow, okay. But yeah, it didn't really detract from the ending that much. I still found it quite a powerful ending. But yeah, I think that would be my niggling thing. I've read some reviews on Goodreads people who maybe thought there was too many characters being introduced, which made it confusing. For me, maybe right at the beginning. So I was reading a story, one of the characters' narratives called Han. And she is a townswoman, and she lives there with her husband Gustav. Their son Kurt's been sent to war. And then, like a bit further on, I'm reading a story, a narrative from another character. And then I get confused because Han's mentioned. I'm like, am I reading Han's story? I had to go back and check and just double check what I was reading. But that's the only time that maybe I had a little bit of confusion. That's probably more on me than the story. Other than that, I do think there's just enough different characters to tell the story it needs to build the story up as is needed. I think any more than maybe, yes, it might have got a little bit confusing, but I think any more it'd have been maybe a bit confusing. Any less characters, then maybe the story wouldn't have been told or built up as much as it needed to. So for me, yeah, apart from right at the beginning, I don't think there was too many characters. It does switch from character to character, perspective to perspective, but for me, that's part of the story and the reading experience. It's to have all these differing views, especially from the townsfolk, about the war and the end of the war and this new English occupation. For me, I just, as I say, I would have liked a bit more story concerning what Benno witnessed. And even at the end, when we find out and you get that gut punch, you know, Benno's not really included in that bit. So yeah, I'd have liked a bit more from that, maybe. But other than that, yeah, there's nothing really bad to say, and that's just a completely subjective thing. So overall, I really enjoyed Once the Deed is Done. As I say, the end is raw and gut punching, especially when you allude back to the story of Han and little Ditty. I'm not sure how you pronounce that. Ditty. I won't give away too many spoilers or any more spoilers than that. But when you find out the ending and then you look back at little Ditty's story, yeah, it kind of wraps that together quite nicely. All I say is I just wished for a bit more from Benno. But I say it's because you've got so many characters and so many subplots going on, it doesn't really detract from the message as a whole, this homage to these displaced people. And it doesn't affect the ending either for me too much. Like, not really at all. It's just me being niggly. But other than that, yeah, I'd say it's a really well written, really unique story. Really enjoyed it. If I'm looking from a personal subjective point of view, it's not the top of my shortlist. I would say I would still put the Matchbox Girl and Sea Scraper above this. But that doesn't mean it's not great. It's still great. All of the books that I've read so far are great. You know, they wouldn't be on a literary prize long list if they weren't. So yeah, hats off to all the authors that I've read so far. So that's my thoughts on Once the Deed is Done. Next, I'm going to finish off the shortlist by reading The Pretender by Joe Harkin. Heard some really good things about that, so I'm hoping to enjoy that. Who knows, I may have a battle for my top spot for the shortlist. And then after that, I'll try and get through the rest of the long list. But that's it for now. Have you read Once the Deed is Done? What did you think? Do you prefer it over some of the other books? Prefer it over the Matchbox Girl? Yeah, let me know in the comments. Until next time, thanks for watching.